Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as a supreme being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth, and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations, so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in this Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the President.
Honorable Senators, I have granted leave of absence to Senator Jayanti Lakshmidial Ramdial, who is ill. Honorable Senators, I have received the following correspondence from Her Excellency the President, Christine Kala Kangalu, ORTT. The Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, by Her Excellency Christine Kala Kangalu, ORTT, President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. To Dr. Tim Gopi Singh, whereas Senator Jayanti Lakshmidial Ramdial is incapable of performing her duties as a senator by reason of illness, now therefore I, Christine Kala Kangalu, President as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(b) and Section 44(4)(b) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, acting in accordance with the advice of the Leader of the Opposition, do hereby appoint you, Tim Gopi Singh, to be a member of the Senate temporarily with effect from the 5th of July 2024 and continuing during the absence of Senator Jayanti Lakshmidial Ramdial by reason of illness. Given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the Office of the President, St. Anne's, this 5th day of July 2024. Honorable Senators, a senator is required to take the oath.
Sorry. I, Dr. Tim Gopi Singh, having been appointed a member of Parliament, do swear by the Bhagavad Gita that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, upon which I am about to enter.
Public business, government business, bills, second reading.
Honourable members, the debate on the following bill, which was adjourned on Thursday, July the 4th, 2024, will be resumed. A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, the Judicial and Legal Service Act, Chapter 601, the Children's Act, Chapter 4601, the Patents Act, Chapter 8276, and the Legal Profession Act, Chapter 9003, with respect to the administration of the Ministry of Legal Affairs and for related matters. The list of speakers on the last occasion was Senator the Honourable Reginald Amor SC, Mover, Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, and Senator Wade Mark. Honourable Senators, Senator Wade Mark utilized 31 minutes of speaking time and therefore has 9 minutes remaining. Senator Mark.
Thank you. Mr. President, thank you for this opportunity to conclude my contribution on this far-reaching piece of legislation. Now, Mr. President, doing some further research on the matter before us, I was able to discover that we passed in 2020 an act called Act Number 8 of 2020, which amended Section 15 of the JLSC Act, and to read as follows, Mr. President, and I quote, "The terms and conditions of service of a chief judicial officer shall be those equivalent to a chief legal officer," end of quote. That is in the legislation. I am asking the Honorable Attorney General to inform this Honorable House if this is not a breach of the functions of the Salaries Review Commission, Mr. President. Mr. President, the SRC signaled its deep concern in its 113th and 117th report. And I have copies of both reports here, 113th and 117th report. And Mr. President, what they were saying in the 113th report under the item or the heading, impact of recent legislative amendment. I want to quote these sections because they are important to us understanding where we are. In paragraph 31, it is stated, and I quote, "The Commission," which is the SRC, "is advised that by virtue of legislative amendments, revised pension arrangements were implemented for a number of offices, namely those of the President, Prime Minister, members of the higher judiciary, and legislators, which, Mr. President, it goes on to tell us, allow for superannuation arrangement to be computed utilizing salary as well as the housing allowance payable where applicable. The Commission holds the view that this new arrangement have created an inequity among office holders in that the quantum pension payable to the various office holders would differ significantly given that a monthly housing allowance is not payable to some of the office holders in the category identified above. Mr. President, it goes on further to state, that is the Commission. The Commission also notes with concern that within recent times, there
Senator, you have 5 more minutes.
Several amendments to compensation to judicial officers, and they talked about what were done. For example, the definition of chief judicial officer was changed to mean either the holder of offices of master of the High Court, the chief magistrate, the registrar general, etc. Mr. President, what they are saying, in essence, the Commission notes that it is the body vested with the constitutional responsibility of recommending salaries and other terms and conditions of offices within their remit. What is happening, Mr. President? They came back just in their 2017 report and again pointed out their concern that the SRC is the only body vested with the remit under the Constitution with responsibility of recommending salaries and other terms and conditions of employment. Mr. President, I ask my colleagues to go to these two reports, because what these reports tell you is that what is contained in the bill before us is unconstitutional. It is unlawful. It is ultra vires. They are usurping the power of the Salaries Review Commission. So that is one point we'd like to make as I speed to my conclusion. The other point I want to reiterate, Mr. President, is the consultancy which the Honorable Attorney General said under this master of the executive, officer, administrator, Master Morris Allen. This consultancy started in 2023, and the AG indicated that. Now, the master, we are told by the AG, assisted Justice John in the formulation of his report. And we understand that this master, Morris Allen, was a member of the judiciary during that time. And therefore, the date of the contract was April 2024, when the lady was consulting on behalf of the Attorney General and the Executive, which is a breach of the separation of powers. I think this requires a police investigation. This is misconduct in public office. And the other thing I want to bring to your attention, Mr. President, is that this same court executive administrator was employed as a consultant to provide management expertise, not as a lawyer, but as a consultant. This falls under the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act. I call on the Office of Public Procurement to conduct an immediate inquiry into this particular debacle, Mr. President. It is a breach of the procurement law as far as we are concerned. Mr. President, it is our view that this matter of the Attorney General in the legislation arrogating unto himself powers to assign responsibilities to these office holders under the merged or fused civil law department is unconstitutional and unlawful. The Attorney General is a politician. He has no business in giving direction or giving any assignments to the Solicitor General or the Chief State Solicitor. He is not in that business. So he has to withdraw this bill, Mr. President. The other point I want to bring to your attention, Mr. President, which is of importance, is simply this. It seems like the new structure has two bosses. You have the Solicitor General and you have the Chief State Solicitor, or the Chief State Attorney, which was the former Chief State Solicitor. And we are told by the Attorney General that both retain their powers. How both of them could retain their powers? The Solicitor General is the boss. So you can't have the Senior State Attorney giving instructions to the Solicitor General. That is an effect in the legislation, and that you have to withdraw that, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to indicate to you that in the few seconds I have, or moments, I want to tell you that Trinidad and Tobago has had a very rich legacy as it relates to luminaries coming out of this office called the Solicitor General's office. It is our view that the government wishes to hijack the Solicitor General's office. And they want to destroy and undermine the Solicitor General's office. And we love none of it.
We'll have none of it. Mr. President, I want to tell you in closing, some of the luminaries that have left a rich legacy, a rich legacy for us. Mr. President, you have people like retired Judge of Appeal, Jean Permanent, retired Justice Lionel Jones, Lynette Stevenson, Honeywell, that is Justice Eleanor Honeywell. Mr. President, all of these people came out of the bosom of the SG department. The SG has a rich legacy. Why does the Attorney General and his cohorts want to destroy the Solicitor General's office and the office of Chief State Solicitor? Why does he want to do that? And why are you allowing, Mr. President, in closing, why are you allowing this Morris Allen lady to direct your show? Mr. President, we call on the government to withdraw this bill. We will not support it. It is unconstitutional, it's unlawful, it's illegal, and therefore we say withdraw this bill, Mr. President.
Leader of Government Business.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this Senate do now adjourn to a date to be fixed. In so doing, I offer best wishes to all senators and their families. Thank you, Mr. President.
Honorable Senators, before I put the question on the adjournment, there are two matters on the motion for the adjournment. Senator Mark.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm so happy I can now exhale. The knee on the neck of Wade Mark has now been removed. I can now breathe. I can now breathe once again. Yes. We defend the lawyers today. We defend the Assistant Solicitor General today. Yes. Mr. President, thank you so very much. Mr. President, the matter I have to address here today is a simple one. It deals with the government giving us a status report on the matter of the refinery at Pointe-à-Pierre. Mr. President, you would know that the closure of the refinery in 2018 was a national tragedy. It was based on a flawed understanding of Petrotrin financials from 2007 to 2018. It was based on an understanding, on a flawed understanding, I should say, of the history of the refinery margins. The role of depreciation started with the new plan. Mr. President, it is clear that the government took a decision to close this plant and really send home almost about 6,000 workers and others without fully understanding the implications of this industry. Now, we must never forget, Mr. President, that this company, by 2016, the refinery, had turned around. In that year, Mr. President, the former President Fitzroy Harewood told a joint select committee that the refinery was a bright spot for Petrotrin. The asset, that is the refinery, has been wasting away for 6 years, Mr. President. And in that time, Mr. President, of course, the asset has depreciated. Government has therefore sought to divest or lease this refinery to many people, but all of it unsuccessful. The OWTU was in line to access that asset, but unsuccessfully. At the end of the day, they were unsuccessful. They were unsuccessful, I should say. Now, the latest interest shown in this thing is something called Mr. Navin Jindal, right? He's from India, who is embroiled, Mr. President, and the Prime Minister and his government always talking about corruption. This man called Jindal is embroiled in corruption charges, money laundering, Mr. President, and it's something called the Coal Gate. Coal Gate. Now, Mr. President, the question that we have to ask the Prime Minister and his Minister of Energy, because both of them have to answer questions here. How did Mr. Jindal come to know of this opportunity? Who was the conduit between Jindal and Trinidad and Tobago? How long has the government been engaged in talks with Jindal and his companies, Mr. President? We don't know. We want them to answer these questions. The Prime Minister told us he's unaware of Mr. Jindal's controversy in terms of what is taking place in India. This man, since 2006, have been charged, and the matters are still before the court, Mr. President. And the same way, Mr. President, he was unaware of the scam involving the Gates Foundation. Remember when I brought it to your attention? Right, Mr. President? Now, what is the role of the Trinidad and Tobago High Commission in New Delhi and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? I think the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs have questions to answer. What is the role of the Indian High Commission? Mr. President, will Mr. Jindal receive special treatment or favors in his quest to acquire our billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar refinery? And what are we to make of his links with PDVSA out of Venezuela? Is Jindal part of the Venezuelan PNM connection? We don't know. We are asking, is the process of the disposal of the refinery consistent with the Procurement Act, or would it come under the Procurement Act as we deal with the sale of our assets? Mr. President, is the process of the disposal of our refinery consistent with this act? As I said, there are so many questions that are unanswered, Mr. President. This government, when they are selling out our resources and assets, there is secrecy, lack of transparency. It happened with Nightwan. It happened with the Dragon deal, Mr. President. Now it's happening with Jindal and the sellout of our refinery, Petrotrin, because we are not getting any information from the government on these matters. Now, Mr. President, we know that and it's a matter that I want to bring to your attention. The government has a lot of questions to answer. Mr. President, I have a file. I have a file as far as this, dealing, Mr. President, with the sellout of MH, Methanol Holding International Limited. They have sold our 56.6% shares for a song and a dance. The Prime Minister and his Minister of Energy must account for their trip to a place called Zurich, because all of these things are tied up with the sellout of the Petrotrin refinery, because they are selling out all our assets. They sell out MHIL, they sell out Petrotrin, they sell out, Mr. President, and therefore, Mr. President, we are calling on the government to come clean. Give us a status report. Are you in bed with Jindal? Are you in bed with Jindal? Are you going to sell our multi-billion dollars refinery, Petrotrin refinery, to Jindal for a song and a dance? These are issues that the population are seeking answers for. And we like the government to give us some clarification, a status report on these matters. So, Mr. President, I am so happy that the United National Congress, like a juggernaut, has stopped the PNM, from the adventure in trying to destroy institutions. They want to destroy Petrotrin, they want to destroy the Energy Department, they want to destroy the Tri-State Solicitor Department, and they sell out all our assets. We will have none of it. Just a short while ago, the Labour Party landslide in the United Kingdom. It's only a matter of time, Mr. President, before we have a landslide in Trinidad and Tobago, sweeping the PNM out of this world. Thank you, Mr. President. We want answers.
Minister of Tourism, Culture and the Arts.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Take it easy. Mr. President, on behalf of the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries, And by way of update, because that is what the motion was about, it was an update to provide an update on the sale of the Pointe-à-Pierre refinery. So by way of update, and ignoring the UNC's partial for maligning everybody and anything who is willing to invest in Trinidad and Tobago, into the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, I will give the country an update. It is common knowledge that a decision was taken to close the Petrotrin refinery in 2018, as it had been in a loss-making position for years. Beginning under the UNC...
One second, Minister. Again, just allow the Minister to make his response so that I can hear him. Minister.
Beginning under the UNC in 2014. Let me repeat that. The Petrotrin refinery in 2018, as it had been in a loss-making position for years, beginning under the UNC in 2014. The refinery required the purchase of approximately 100,000 barrels of crude a day to be processed, and this high cost, as well as the high and inefficient lifting costs of crude oil, had driven the refinery into a loss-making operation. Additionally, the company had accumulated approximately $450 million in short-term loans for crude purchases and could not service those loans without the help from the Ministry of Finance, ergo, the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The refinery was in a loss-making position, and Petrotrin was set to continue losing approximately $2 billion a year, which was not sustainable. After the refinery was closed, invitations for proposals to restart the refinery were invited. Proposals were received, and it was agreed to give a company formed by the OWTU, Patriotic Energy, 2 periods of exclusivity to negotiate an agreement to take over the refinery and reopen it. At the time, the Cabinet appointed a committee of experienced and successful businessmen, lawyers, and public servants to negotiate with Patriotic Energy and to evaluate their proposals. Unfortunately, the proposals could not pass muster, and the Cabinet appointed an evaluation committee. The appointed evaluation committee advised that it was not feasible to reach agreement. The government bent over backwards to work with the union's company's proposals, even agreeing to exclusivity periods, but the proposals were simply not feasible. After that, Trinidad Petroleum Holdings Limited and the government continued to receive unsolicited proposals from many entities for the restarting of the refinery. The TPHL Group has continued to expend money to properly preserve the refinery. TPHL set up a process which includes the use of independent advisors to analyze and evaluate proposals that have been made over time. The government has made it clear, both domestically and internationally, that Trinidad and Tobago has a refinery available for any entity that puts forward a workable and feasible proposal that makes sense. Within recent months, TPHL received a number of proposals for the restarting of the refinery. As a result, the board of TPHL decided to have their experts, including independent international experts, evaluate the proposals with an intention to then advise the board as to feasibility of these proposals. The Honorable Prime Minister, on recent working visits to Ghana and India, presented generally to audiences that Trinidad and Tobago has a refinery available for operation. As a result, inquiries and expressions of interest were generated, and TPHL agreed to receive proposals until the end of July, which will then be evaluated by its experts, including its independent international experts, and if there are any feasible proposals, then to move them forward for further evaluation. The Cabinet set up an official evaluation committee to be chaired by former Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, now High Commissioner to the UK, High Commissioner His Excellency Vishnu Danpal, including a Permanent Secretary from the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries and other experts, including private sector experts, to evaluate any proposals for the restart of the refinery that are sent forward after the end of July by TPHL. To make it abundantly clear, neither the Honorable Prime Minister nor the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries has been involved in any RFP process or any evaluation of proposals process. To date, the receipt of proposals has been handled and managed by TPHL as stated above. Accordingly, the population should ignore the frantic and desperate ramblings of the UNC surrounding the future of the refinery. The government hopes that by the end of July, feasible proposals will be received to then go through the stated and proper evaluation process. And I would ask that the UNC stop trying to malign and chase away all the potential investors to Trinidad and Tobago. You are not doing the People's National Movement anything. You are acting inimical to the interests of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. In an article dated 14 June 2024 in the Newsday, the Honorable Prime Minister is reported to have said that we need to revisit the Environmental Management Act as it is being used to obstruct rather than help development. This, while reiterating that Tobago needs to be a major tourist destination and declaring that the proposed construction of a $500 million Marriott brand hotel and property development at Rocky Point has both his and government's full support. Now, I agree with the Honorable Prime Minister that we should revisit the Environmental Management Act. That is the thrust of this motion, but for entirely different reasons. Next year, the Environmental Management Act will be 30 years old. It is therefore timely to renew how it has worked, where it falls short, and where it can do better. Further, 30 years ago, when scientists were warning us about climate change, their voices were effectively drowned out by cover-ups, counter-narratives, and distractions coming from the fossil fuel sector, applying the same playbook that the tobacco industry used to downplay, obfuscate, and derail warnings about the dangers of tobacco. Today, because the Caribbean is living through the consequences of the dread advance of global warming, we know better. Indeed, climate change is no longer a risk of the future. The effects of climate change are no longer a distant concern facing our children and grandchildren. It's happening as I speak. 2024 is already the hottest year on record, influencing global weather events, including drought and emergency water restrictions for cities in Mexico, Colombia, India, Spain, South Africa. And a hyperactive hurricane season is predicted for the Caribbean this year. So while the desire to create jobs and bring business to Tobago is commendable, it ought not to be a case of one or the other. We don't have to choose between jobs or the environment. With the right policies in place, we can have both. Why assume that large brand hotels are good for the country when the landscape of tourism has evolved, when there is a growing trend towards boutique hotels, eco-resorts, and vacation rentals driven by the desire for personalized and unique experiences? when sustainable tourism and the increasing preference for authentic local experience has led to the rise of smaller independent accommodations, a better fit for Tobago, which is an eco, not luxury destination. While large hotels remain popular for those who want the all-inclusive experience or to host conferences, weddings, and other events, providing necessary space and infrastructure, there is a notable shift towards more diverse and sustainable options in island destinations. When all-inclusive hotels compete unfairly with locals, everything being provided within the compound and guests being discouraged from straying outside. While it may not be sensible to build expensive seafront structures with rising sea levels, when internet searches reveal that many once thriving beach resorts and former celebrity hotspots are today rotting, crumbling, or have completely been taken over by nature, hotels forced to shutter because of a drop in the number of visitors, an end to funding, and other causes. While it's true that large brand hotels can provide a level of employment, research confirms that there is also a high degree of economic leakage. A significant portion of the revenue generated by large brand hotels goes to the international owners and the investors, rather than staying within the local community. When building large brand hotels in environmentally sensitive areas can lead to degradation of the natural environment, especially at a place like Rocky Point, which is so special and historic. So whether large brand hotels are the best fit for Tobago is a question that deserves careful examination. Is it wiser to court big name chain hotels or to prioritize small-scale accommodations where personal interactions are highly valued and visitors get the chance to learn about our culture, norms, values, and customs? Turning now to the EMA. First, it must be recognized that the authority was not established to thwart business and commercial opportunity. The EMA is not a tree-hugging organization run by environmental activists. It's a regulator which doesn't take sides. The law does not allow the EMA to act capriciously or in a biased manner against the government and government-supported initiatives. Rather, the authority must act carefully, responsibly, and fairly within its statutory remit, using environmental impact assessments, prescribed terms of reference, and stakeholder consultation. In fact, environmentalists have a very different view of the EMA. For them, the authority is not doing enough. They see the EMA as an inadequate, ineffective, and toothless organization which is failing to protect the environment. But either way, the climate crisis doesn't care. In our lifetime, the world's ice sheets will collapse, causing cities to flood and islands to disappear. And the crisis will no longer be unfolding in a gradual manner. When the polar ice sheets melt, things are going to escalate and cascade. Yet we move along as though it's business as usual. Policymakers still give greater deference to commercial objectives rather than to environmental standards and concerns. Mr. President, it's time to panic because we're in deep trouble. While threat levels are increasing exponentially, our environmental response is not keeping pace. At this moment, protecting the environment is the most important thing our leaders can do for our people. Government must recognize that we are embedded in nature and we depend upon it for our survival. Instead of degrading the environment, we should be focusing on ecosystem restoration. That is why we need to upgrade and update our environmental laws and processes. We should rename the Environmental Commission into the Environmental Court, duly recognizing it as a specialized environmental court. We should remove the bureaucratic obstacles to direct party actions under the EMA Act. We must provide the EMA with the capital and resources it needs. We need to expand the Environmental Police Unit to a strength of at least 50 officers rather than the paltry force of 11 in Trinidad and 2 in Tobago as currently obtains. We need to unlock the Green Fund and to use the money as intended. Now, there's a lot more I can say, but time doesn't allow. Suffice to say, the planet is on an unsustainable trajectory. Everything is expected to change. The air we breathe, the water we drink, many places will become uninhabitable. And that is why we need to place the environment at the center of social and economic development. And that is why our environmental laws and processes should be state-of-the-art, user-friendly, and efficient. Instead of enfeebling the EMA, we should be strengthening it. I thank you.
Minister of Planning and Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And of course, it's always a pleasure as a visitor to this very distinguished Senate to have the opportunity to speak at these chambers. Mr. President, the government of Trinidad and Tobago prioritizes responsible environmental stewardship as part of our Vision 2030 National Development Strategy, specifically in Theme 5, placing the environment at the center of social and economic development. The achievement of this ideal is built on the attainment of theme-specific goals supported by strategic initiatives and actions, all of which are continuous and ongoing in our quest for sustainable national development. For purposes of this contribution, Mr. President, I will refer to goals 1, 3, and 4 of this theme and their relevant strategic initiatives and actions. Goal 1 aims to strengthen environmental governance and management systems by developing a comprehensive, coordinated approach to environmental issues, including built environment management and climate change. Key actions include reviewing environmental policies and legislation, establishing an institutional framework, and updating spatial policies and standards. Goal 3 focuses on assessing climate vulnerability, recognizing Trinidad and Tobago's susceptibility to climate change impacts like sea level rise. Strategic initiatives involve identifying areas of greater climate risk and implementing adaptation actions for vulnerable sectors. Goal 4 aims to create comprehensive waste and pollution management systems by improving solid waste disposal, implementing international commitments for chemicals and waste, and enhancing pollution management systems. As I have indicated, Mr. President, the National Development Strategy Vision 2030 is a work in progress with a multiplicity of moving parts, and it is against this backdrop that we must consider this statement for discussion. Many Caribbean states are small island developing states, also known by the acronym SIDS, sharing vulnerabilities to climate change, including warming ocean temperatures and sea level rise. Despite these challenges, SIDS must utilize natural resources to support economic development, often relying on tourism. Large brand hotels, by virtue of their characteristics, can therefore offer economic, environmental, as well as social benefits. In Trinidad and Tobago, the environmental law governing large brand hotels is the Certificate of Environmental Clearance, CEC Rules, 2001, and CEC Designated Activities, 2001 order, derived from the Environmental Management Act, Chapter 3505. These regulations aim to protect, conserve, and wisely use the environment. The CEC Designated Order lists 44 designated activities requiring an environmental clearance due to potential impacts. Large brand hotels are classified under the designated activity, which refers to the establishment, modification, expansion, or decommissioning or abandonment, inclusive of associated works of hotels, inns with a capacity of 30 rooms and more. They are subject to independent review of the Environmental Management Authority. Applications are assessed to mitigate environmental impacts, including climate change considerations. If significant impacts are identified, the environmental impact assessment may be required. Thus, there are robust environmental laws ensuring large branded hotels meet sustainable development standards. Meanwhile, Mr. President, the Cabinet is considering strengthening the Environmental Management Act for mandatory greenhouse gas emissions reporting. Trinidad and Tobago ratified the Paris Agreement in 2018 and began a transparency reporting project in 2020, becoming the first English-speaking Caribbean country to do so. Under the Paris Agreement, we regularly report on greenhouse gas emissions and mitigation progress through the nationally determined contributions plan that is updated every 5 years. The principle of measurement, reporting, and verification was introduced with a $1 million grant from the Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency, CBIT, of the Global Environment Facility, GEF. While progress has been made, reporting remains voluntary. The Nationally Environment Policy of 2018 prioritizes improving the local environment. Strategic planning and management of settlements are essential to reduce community vulnerabilities to social and environmental threats. Buildings and development projects must be designed with sustainable and resilient infrastructure. Mr. President, with your permission, I will also touch upon the role of the Town and Country Planning Division of my ministry, which in fulfillment of its mandate, as prescribed by the Town and Country Planning Act, Chapter 3501, seeks to ensure orderly and progressive land development, safeguarding against climate change impacts such as sea level rise and adverse weather conditions affecting small island developing states like Trinidad and Tobago. Hotel construction is classified as development under this Act, requiring planning commission via the Automated Construction Planning Platform developed TT. Proposals are assessed for compliance with land use policies and environmental impacts, including potential environmental impact assessments. Projects in coastal areas seek advice from relevant agencies to mitigate sea level rise impacts, and hotel density is calculated per bedroom, adhering to area standards for height as well as setbacks. The division has drafted several spatial planning guidelines addressing climate change and hotel development. Planning guidelines for solar facilities, planning guidelines for resort development, planning guidelines for rainwater harvesting, climate change adaptation design guidelines, planning guidelines for green infrastructure, standards and guidelines for hillside development, planning guidelines for green building construction. Mr. President, as I conclude, I am pleased to bring to your attention the fact that the following initiatives are also underway to address issues of climate change in keeping with the government's approach of integrating climate change into national development processes and international development. And they are the updated National Climate Change Policy incorporating the Paris Agreement provisions has been submitted to Cabinet for approval. Once approved, any legislative requirement that may be necessary for domestic implementation, this will be pursued. The draft rules for mandatory greenhouse emissions reporting is under Cabinet for consideration. Transparency reporting rules under the Paris Agreement are being drafted to track climate actions across ministries, agencies, and NGOs in keeping with the government's policy of an all-of-government approach to addressing climate change through integration into the national development process. There is also the just transition of workshop policy addressing the impacts of energy transition on workers, and that has also been submitted for consideration. The government is considering accession to the Escazú Agreement, which will be enhancing environmental governance and aligning with the Paris Agreement. Any legislative requirements necessary to implement this agreement will be pursued once the accession is made. Under Cabinet consideration is a proposal to integrate all environmental and climate policies into strategic and operational plans across all government sectors with the aim of going beyond siloed approaches, again in keeping with the all-of-government approach to addressing climate change. Mr. President, the preceding 6 items provide the policy framework which any additional laws will be drafted to enable implementation. Mr. President, I thank you.
Honourable Senators, before I put the question for the adjournment, permit me to commend and congratulate each and every one of you on the completion of 4 days of business in this Senate, which would have required nothing less of mental and physical prowess. However testy at times, your perseverance has shown commitment to the people's business that is required of all of us when we sit in these chairs in the Senate. As such, all that is left for me to say is to wish each and every one of you a very happy, relaxing, and calm recess. Thank you very much. Honourable Senators, the question is that this Senate do now adjourn to a date to be fixed. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The Senate now stands adjourned to a date to be fixed.